Howdy howdy, my name is Ariel. Welcome to the Cultura Anime blog. So I'm doing this video blog more or less as a response to a video created by Rebecca Crawford. It's called High versus Low, and it's talking about, it's a video talking about the distinctions between high and low culture. I'll link that in this blog post as well, so you can check out that original video. So what I'm talking about here is high versus low culture and the distinctions between the two. So I'm an anthropologist, and to me, as an anthropologist, culture means anything that is learned or shared. So by this definition, culture contains pretty much anything that you do, except for biological processes. For example, sneezing is not a cultural act, but the way that you've been taught to sneeze and the way that you behave around sneezing is a cultural act. What I realized quickly, though, is that when we're talking about high versus low culture, we're not talking about that type of culture. We're not talking about anything learned and shared. We're talking about something different and very specific. The way that I see it, we could pretty much swap out the word culture here for art or entertainment. Because when you're talking about high or low culture, it seems like most of the time you're talking about works of art or, TV shows or movies or pieces of music, something like that. Culture as a noun, essentially. So when I watched this video talking about high and low culture, honestly the first thing that I kept thinking over and over again was, I've never heard culture or pieces of work actively described in terms of being a part of high or low culture. I also couldn't stop thinking that using these terms is incredibly problematic. And when I say problematic, I mean you're creating a dichotomy. You're saying, here's all this stuff that's high culture, and here's all this stuff that's low culture. And low culture obviously has a negative connotation, but also a lot of times it's simply a matter of access to resources, and the average person does not have access to high culture, which is why I think it's problematic to kind of judge people who don't consume high culture because it's probably not available to them. So already I hate this terminology. Let's get rid of it. I'm down. And so, naturally, I let out a huge sigh of relief when, at the end of the video, the makers asked, do these labels work? And they asked, if we get rid of them, what words should we use to talk about culture? Well, so, yes, as you know, my initial reaction is, no, these labels do not work. Let's kill them. Using these terms is at best pointless, and at the very worst, super offensive and harmful. But I tend to react strongly and negatively when anyone ever tries to apply a dichotomy to describing anything, because it's simply that nothing is that simple. For example, something like the opera may be considered high culture. However, I can get my fancy laptop here and I can look up pretty much any operatic song or performance and then watch it from my own home.
When the dang internet's not busted.
Is it still high culture? Has it now become low culture because it's so accessible? Opera performances.
Now in colorful new styles.
Gotta watch the commercials first. This is an entire performance of the opera Aida at the San Francisco Opera starring Luciano Pavarotti. And it's all here, 2 hours and 43 minutes. Though I can watch this whole thing. And that's freaking crazy. Yeah, come in. So my roommate has walked in on the middle of filming this video blog, so that means it's time for Ask My Roommate How He Feels About a Topic. Great. So, Eve, what does it mean, what is high culture to you? What is something that you would put into the grouping of high culture?
Academia.
Academia?
Yeah.
Would you care to elaborate?
Because it's like, you need a lot of money and a lot of access to a lot of things, other things in high culture, like art and museums and stuff, for like academia to even make sense.
So when we're talking about high culture, we're kind of talking about things that are like far removed and not for everybody.
Yeah.
Specifically for few people.
Yeah.
Thank you, Evan.
You're welcome.
You can go back to your low cultural activities. What I want to ask now, which is something that my lovely roommate kind of addressed, is what allows something to even be high culture in the first place? Does it have to be expensive? Because with a lot of these things, like the opera, it's kind of my only example, as you can see, the opera is very expensive. You can't just pop into an opera for $250. Maybe you can, I don't know. Let me know if that's a thing that exists. But let's talk about things that are supposedly low culture, something like South Park. There are a few reasons that South Park would be called a part of low culture, partially because of how accessible it is, but also probably because of what people say about it. People like James Delingpole of The Telegraph described South Park as, you know, this is a high culture review because I can't pronounce the words that he's using. South Park is ugly to look at, unpleasant on the ear, badly drawn, execrably voiced, puerile, cynical, expletive-ridden, vulgar, trashy, and almost entirely free of likable, or indeed psychologically plausible characters. So whoa there, James. That's a little bit harsh. I've always enjoyed the show, South Park. I've watched it since I was a kid. Does the fact that I enjoy the program mean that I myself am vulgar and trashy? I personally do not think so. Maybe vulgar, but I ain't trashy. So while this show is apparently just downright awful to good old James, he also says that South Park is, quote, possibly the funniest program on television and certainly the boldest, bravest, and most socio-politically acute. And I think he's right. It's an incredibly perceptive satire. In the episode titled, You Have Zero Friends, we see poor Kip Drorty and how his entire life is quite literally meaningless because he has absolutely no Facebook friends. Now one of the four protagonists, Kyle, adds poor Kip Drorty as a Facebook friend because he feels bad for him, and then you see Kip go through this amazing transformation. He thinks that Kyle's now his best friend. He tells his parents that he finally has a friend, and his parents are so happy. He even literally takes his computer with Kyle's Facebook pulled up and sits it in the movie theater next to him, and they're best friends. It's amazing. And so it's hilarious. And this concept seems ridiculous, right? The idea of taking a laptop into the movie theater and being like, this is my friend! But I think it's actually, it's such a beautiful satire. And it's accurate too. So this concept may seem ridiculous, but there literally are people in the world who spend more time on the internet, on Facebook, than they do interacting with people face to face. So it's not really that crazy to make a comment about how obsessed people can become with this website. To me, while South Park is vulgar and ridiculous, it's always been kind of absurdist. They're taking these truths from life, people overusing Facebook, and then just blowing it up to the point of absurdity. And it makes you question, is Facebook worth my time? Is it completely just sucking my life away? Which is sometimes how I feel, for sure. But you may be asking, how is it possible for someone to think that the same program is both disgusting and vulgar, and also socio-politically acute? How can this be? Well, it can be because the previously used labels of high and low simply do not fit culture anymore. Things are either totally respectable and wonderful or totally pieces of garbage. You don't have either one or the other necessarily. So these labels of high culture and low culture just don't work. Things in this world, in this day and age, are way too interconnected. Everything's accessible. Everything. So what will work? That's the question. What type of language do we use to describe culture and these things that we see in the media? Well, here's what makes sense to me, and this is coming from an anthropologist. What if we tried talking about culture in terms of the effects that it has on its consumers? Why don't we look at the way that people consume media? Different types of media. Why don't we look at the way that people interact with the media that they're exposed to, and how that media changes the way that people interact with each other? Not in a way that we're judging the results as either good or bad. More often than not, a television show or a video game or a movie is something that is consumed in a group of two or more people. And a shared interest or love in these cultural items, such as a television show, can foster a actually really strong relationship. I think it makes absolute sense to talk about culture, these things, in terms of how it affects individuals and groups of people. The word culture originally comes from cultura animi, which means cultivation of the soul. So let's acknowledge how these cultural experiences, whether it's watching something or listening to something or reading something, changes us as human beings. Until next time, thank you very much, and I hope that this has given you some food for thought.